"Wait, you're putting that inside me." The Apache woman froze as the cowboy tried to save her life. In this vast, quiet land, life was never easy, and danger often lurked in unexpected places. Amidst the tall, swaying grass, a figure moved cautiously, trying to remain unseen. She was a young Apache woman, her dark hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders and her eyes wide with alertness. Her name was Ahioka, which meant she brought happiness in her language. Today, however, happiness seemed very far away. Ahioka's heart pounded as she crouched low behind a rock, listening to the distant sounds of the plains. Earlier that day, she had been caught in a skirmish between her people and another tribe. She had been separated from her group during the chaos, and in the fight, she had sustained a deep cut on her side. The pain throbbed steadily, reminding her that she was alone and vulnerable. Each movement sent sharp waves of agony through her body, and the thought of staying hidden until help arrived weighed heavily on her mind. She took slow, careful breaths, trying to calm herself. The wind shifted, and with it came the faint sound of hooves in the distance. Her eyes widened as she peeked over the rock. A man was approaching, riding a sturdy brown horse. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shaded most of his face, but she could see the sharp, determined look in his eyes. His clothes were rough and worn, the kind a cowboy or a traveler might wear, and a small satchel hung at his side, likely containing tools or supplies. Ahioka instinctively ducked lower, pressing herself against the rock. Her mind raced. Who was he? Was he friend or foe? She had learned from a young age that strangers, especially those from outside her people, could not always be trusted. Some brought help, but others brought pain. Her eyes followed him as he rode slowly across the plain, seemingly unaware of her presence. The man dismounted carefully, tying his horse to a nearby tree. He moved with a quiet confidence, his steps deliberate, almost gentle. Ahioka's curiosity mingled with her fear. Something about him seemed different from the soldiers and raiders she had encountered before. There was no aggression in his movements, only caution and care. She remained hidden, studying him from behind the rock, unsure of what he intended. The man knelt down, pulling out a small bag from his satchel. He arranged his tools neatly on the ground, herbs, bandages, and a few other items she didn't recognize. Ahioka's heart skipped a beat. He was preparing something, and her mind immediately jumped to the worst possibilities. Was he here to harm her, or worse? She wanted to run, but her body ached, and her injuries made it almost impossible to move quickly. She remembered the stories her grandmother had told her, about the people who could heal with plants and hands, about strangers who sometimes came in the most unexpected forms to help those in need. Could this man be one of those healers? Ahioka's mind was torn between hope and fear. She stayed completely still, every muscle tense as she watched him prepare. The man looked around as if sensing someone was nearby. Ahioka held her breath, praying he wouldn't see her. She could feel the sweat on her forehead, the sting of blood from her wound, and the ache in her muscles from hiding and running. He reached into his satchel again and pulled out a small, sharp knife. Her eyes widened, and she instinctively took a step back. "Wait," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "What is he doing?" The man didn't notice her. He was focused on his work, carefully cleaning and preparing the tools. He muttered to himself in a low, calm voice. Ahioka didn't understand the words, but there was something soothing about the sound. It was different from the harsh shouts and screams she had heard during the fight. She wanted to stay hidden, but the pain in her side grew unbearable. She pressed her hand against the wound, feeling the warmth of her blood on her fingers. Her breaths came in shallow, rapid gasps. She knew she couldn't stay here forever. If she didn't get help soon, the injury could become dangerous. The man stood and looked around again, this time more carefully. He seemed to sense something, a presence just beyond his vision. Ahioka froze completely, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he could hear it. He took a step forward, then paused. His eyes scanned the horizon, and for a moment their gazes almost met. She ducked instinctively, holding her breath, and prayed he would move on. Instead, he started walking slowly in her direction. Ahioka's mind raced. Should she run? Could she run? Her body was weak, and the uneven ground made it risky. She knew that if she moved too quickly, she could collapse before she got to safety. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, but another part of her, a quieter, more cautious part, told her to wait and see what the man would do. He knelt again near a bush, picking some leaves and examining them carefully. His movements were deliberate, careful, as if he were used to handling delicate things. Ahioka's curiosity began to overpower her fear. Could he be a healer after all? The thought made her chest tighten, not with fear but with a cautious hope. She inched slightly closer, trying to get a better look without being seen. The man didn't notice. He seemed completely focused on his task, pulling out a small bottle from his satchel and mixing the leaves with a clear liquid. Ahioka's eyes widened as she recognized a faint smell, something like the herbs her grandmother used to treat cuts and bruises. Her hope grew. Maybe this man wasn't a threat. Maybe he could help her. But just as she considered revealing herself, a sudden noise made her jump. A bird flapped its wings nearby, startled by the man's presence. He turned quickly, his eyes scanning the area, and Ahioka froze in place. Her heart raced, and she felt a wave of panic. She couldn't show herself yet, not until she was sure he was safe. The man returned to his work, seemingly reassured by the absence of danger. He carefully arranged the mixture he had prepared, then looked around once more. Ahioka realized he was likely searching for someone in need. Her heart pounded harder. Could he be looking for her? Could he see her hidden behind the rock? Gathering her courage, she decided to slowly reveal herself. She stood up just enough for him to notice a movement, but not fully visible. The man's eyes widened slightly, and then he smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. He didn't reach for a weapon or shout. Instead, he spoke softly, in a language she didn't understand, but the tone was kind. Ahioka's heart began to calm just a little. She took another careful step forward, her body trembling with pain and fear. The man gestured for her to stay where she was, and she obeyed, trusting the calm in his voice and the gentle way he moved. He knelt again, picking up a small piece of cloth, and motioned for her to show her injury. Her mind raced, but she knew she had no other choice. Slowly, she lifted her shirt just enough to reveal the deep cut on her side. The man's eyes softened, and he nodded, as if understanding the severity of her injury. He reached into his satchel again and pulled out a thin, clean cloth. Ahioka flinched at the sight of it, unsure what he was going to do. The man noticed her hesitation and spoke softly, his tone calm and patient. He pointed to the cloth, then to her wound, and gently motioned as if to say he would help her. Ahioka's chest tightened with fear. She had been hurt by strangers before, and her trust didn't come easily. But the pain in her side reminded her that she couldn't hide forever. After a long, tense moment, she finally nodded slightly, signaling that he could proceed. The man smiled gently, and with careful hands he began to clean the wound. The sting of the antiseptic made her gasp, but she stayed still, focusing on the steady, reassuring presence of the cowboy. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease, not completely, but enough to let her feel a tiny spark of hope. As he worked, Ahioka's mind wandered. Who was this man? Why had he come here alone to help someone he didn't know? Could there be people in the world who were kind, even in places so harsh and dangerous? She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and cautious admiration. For the first time that day, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in the world. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The plains stretched endlessly around them, but in that moment, Ahioka felt a fragile connection forming. Between the injured Apache woman and the wandering cowboy, a bond was beginning, one born not of words, but of trust, courage, and the simple act of helping someone in need. And though she didn't know it yet, this encounter would change both of their lives forever. Ahioka pressed her hand against the cloth, feeling the sting of the antiseptic as the cowboy worked on her wound. Each careful movement of his hands reminded her that she was alive, that she was being cared for. She could feel the warmth and steadiness in his touch, and for the first time since the fight, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. Yet, fear lingered in her mind. She didn't know this man, and trust was not something she gave lightly. The cowboy, whose name she would soon learn was Caleb, worked silently for a few moments, arranging his tools and preparing a small tube filled with a clear, viscous liquid. Ahioka's eyes widened as she realized he was preparing something else, something that she did not understand. Her body tensed instantly, a shiver running down her spine. The uncertainty of what he planned to do made her instinctively draw back. "Wait," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're putting that inside me." Caleb paused, his hands frozen mid-motion. He looked at her calmly, not with anger or impatience, but with understanding. He tried to explain in soft, simple words, but Ahioka did not understand his language fully. Instead, she watched his gestures, slow, careful, and deliberate. He was showing her the tube, pointing to the wound, and gently motioning that it would help her heal. Ahioka's mind raced. Memories of pain, fear, and betrayal flashed through her thoughts. She had been hurt before, by people who had promised help but brought only more pain. The thought of letting this stranger do something inside her body filled her with panic. She shook her head slightly, pressing her hands over the wound as if to shield herself. Caleb noticed her fear and smiled gently, trying not to startle her further. He knelt a little farther back, letting her see that he wasn't going to force her. Instead, he motioned that she could trust him, that he would be careful. He even demonstrated on a small leaf, showing how the liquid would help the cut heal faster without causing harm. Ahioka watched him closely. Her breathing was heavy, her heart racing, but something about his patience and calm presence began to ease the fear in her chest, just slightly. She could see that he genuinely wanted to help. Slowly, she nodded, a small and cautious gesture of trust. Caleb smiled again, a soft and reassuring smile, and carefully moved closer. He applied the liquid gently to her wound, his touch careful to avoid causing unnecessary pain. Ahioka flinched at first, the unfamiliar sensation making her gasp, but she remained still, watching every movement. She realized that the sting was temporary, and in its place came a sense of relief. The bleeding was slowing, and the wound was being treated. "Good," Caleb said softly, nodding to himself. His eyes scanned the plains again, alert for any danger. Even though he was focused on helping Ahioka, he never let his guard down. She admired this about him. He seemed capable and strong, yet kind, a combination she rarely encountered. As he worked, Ahioka tried to steady her racing thoughts. She wondered why he was here, why he had come alone into such a dangerous area. Perhaps he was a traveler or a wandering healer. She had no way of knowing, but for now she decided to focus on surviving. Trust could come later. Right now, she needed to allow him to finish tending to her injury. Caleb cleaned and dressed the wound with careful precision, wrapping it tightly but gently. Each movement was deliberate, and he seemed aware of her discomfort, adjusting his technique to avoid causing pain. Ahioka marveled at the patience he displayed. She had never met someone who worked so calmly under such circumstances, someone who seemed to care about her well-being without expecting anything in return. When he finished, he stepped back slightly, giving her space. He spoke softly again, pointing to her wound, then to a small bundle of herbs he had prepared. He wanted her to understand that these herbs would help her recover faster. Ahioka nodded, recognizing some of the plants from the stories her grandmother had told her. This small connection eased her mind further. For a few moments, they simply observed each other. The wind rustled the tall grass, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, and the plains stretched endlessly around them. Ahioka felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that she was being helped, and anxiety because she had no idea what would come next. Caleb seemed to sense her thoughts. He smiled gently, then slowly reached into his satchel again. This time he pulled out a small bandage, carefully applying it over the treated area. Ahioka winced slightly but remained still. She was beginning to trust him, at least enough to allow him to continue. Once the bandage was secure, Caleb leaned back and motioned for her to rest. He spoke softly, in a tone that felt almost musical, though she could not understand the words. He pointed toward a nearby shaded area under a tree, indicating that she could lie down and recover for a while. Ahioka hesitated, then slowly moved, lowering herself carefully to the ground. The grass was cool beneath her, and the shade offered some comfort from the scorching sun. As she rested, Ahioka began to notice more details about Caleb. His hands were strong, yet gentle. His face, partially shaded by the wide-brimmed hat, carried a look of determination and kindness. His movements were precise, as if he had done this many times before. She realized that he was not just a cowboy or traveler. He had experience in helping people survive injuries, and he knew how to handle difficult situations. Ahioka's mind wandered back to her own people, to the safety and warmth of her tribe. She wondered if they were searching for her, if they knew she had been hurt. Fear and worry tugged at her heart, but seeing Caleb's calm and capable presence gave her a new sense of hope. Perhaps she could survive this ordeal, perhaps she could make it through this alone, though now she wasn't entirely alone. Caleb, noticing her gaze, spoke again, pointing toward the horizon. He was suggesting something. Perhaps he wanted to guide her to safety, perhaps he was offering protection. Ahioka's heart raced. She was torn between fear of strangers and the realization that she needed help to survive. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, signaling that she would trust him to some extent. The next few minutes were quiet but filled with small gestures of understanding. Caleb checked the wound again, adjusted the bandage, and offered a few drops of water from a small canteen. Ahioka accepted, grateful for the small comfort. She sipped slowly, feeling the cool liquid soothe her parched throat. The simple act of drinking water together created a subtle connection, a shared moment in the vast, dangerous plains. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the ground, Caleb began to prepare a small fire. He worked carefully, keeping it controlled, so as not to draw unnecessary attention. Ahioka watched, fascinated by his skill and caution. The warmth of the fire was comforting, and for the first time since she had been injured, she felt a small sense of security. While the fire crackled, Caleb took out some of the herbs he had prepared earlier. He began to crush them into a fine powder, mixing them with water to create a simple remedy. Ahioka watched closely, curiosity and caution mixing in her mind. The smell of the herbs was familiar and soothing, reminding her of home and the care of her grandmother. He gestured for her to drink a small portion, and though her hands trembled, she accepted. The taste was bitter but not unpleasant, and she could feel a gentle warmth spreading through her body. The remedy was not just for healing the wound, it was for restoring her strength, giving her the energy to move and survive. Ahioka's fear began to ease further. She realized that Caleb was not only helping her heal physically, but he was also providing a sense of hope she had not felt in a long time. The combination of his patience, skill, and gentle demeanor created a fragile but growing trust. She still did not understand him fully, but actions spoke louder than words. Night began to fall, and the plains grew colder. Caleb gathered some additional branches to keep the fire burning and ensured that Ahioka was as comfortable as possible. She curled up on the ground, still wary but feeling safer than she had in hours. The pain in her side had lessened, and her breathing had steadied. For the first time, she allowed herself to relax, even if just a little. Caleb sat nearby, keeping a watchful eye on the surroundings. Though he appeared relaxed, every muscle in his body was alert, ready to respond to any threat. Ahioka noticed this and felt a deep sense of gratitude. Here was someone who had no obligation to help her, yet he had chosen to do so, risking his own safety. As darkness settled over the plains, Ahioka's thoughts began to wander. She thought of her family, of the home she had left behind, and of the dangers that awaited beyond the safety of this moment. Yet, she also thought of Caleb, the cowboy who had come into her life in the most unexpected way. His kindness, patience, and skill gave her a small, fragile hope that she might survive, that she might see another day. And so, under the vast, starlit sky, an injured Apache woman and a wandering cowboy began a story of trust, courage, and survival. One small step at a time, the bond between them started to grow, born not of words, but of understanding, patience, and the simple act of helping someone in need. The night was deep, and the plains were quiet except for the crackle of the small fire Caleb had built. The stars above seemed endless, shining brightly in the clear sky. Ahioka lay close to the fire, her body still sore from the wound, but she could feel the warmth in her chest that came not just from the flames, but from a growing sense of trust. Despite the danger of the world around them, she had allowed herself to be helped, and now, the fear that had gripped her earlier seemed to soften just a little. Caleb remained near the fire, sitting cross-legged, his eyes scanning the horizon. He occasionally glanced at Ahioka, making sure she was comfortable and not in pain. Though he did not speak much, his calm presence was reassuring. Ahioka observed him quietly. She noticed the way his hands moved with precision and care, whether arranging the firewood or checking the small bundle of herbs. There was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet strength combined with patience, that made her heart feel safer than it had in days. Yet, even with this sense of security, fear lingered in her mind. She remembered the faces of those who had tried to harm her earlier, the confusion and chaos of the skirmish, and the sharp sting of the injury that had nearly taken her life. Every noise outside the circle of fire made her jump. The rustling of leaves, the distant howl of a coyote, the snap of a twig under the weight of some unseen creature, each sound reminded her that the plains were not safe. Caleb seemed aware of her tension. Without a word, he gestured for her to take deep breaths, demonstrating slowly with his own chest rising and falling. Ahioka watched him and tried to imitate the movement. The simple exercise helped her calm slightly. She realized that while the plains were dangerous, she was no longer completely alone. There was someone here who cared for her, someone willing to protect her in ways she had never expected. As the night grew colder, Caleb reached into his satchel again. This time he pulled out a small, simple pack of food, a few pieces of dried meat and some bread. He motioned for her to eat, pointing first to the food and then to himself, indicating that it was safe. Ahioka hesitated at first, wary of taking anything from a stranger. But hunger gnawed at her, and she realized she needed strength if she was to survive. Slowly, she reached out and accepted the food. Caleb smiled, a soft, encouraging smile. He sat back and waited patiently as she ate, understanding that trust was built slowly, one small action at a time. Ahioka chewed carefully, tasting the dry meat and bread. It was simple, not seasoned as her people might have preferred, but it nourished her body and soothed her mind. The act of eating, together yet apart, created a fragile bond between them, a silent acknowledgement of mutual care and understanding. Once she had eaten, Caleb gestured again, pointing toward the bandage on her side and then to a small bottle of liquid. Ahioka froze. Memories of her initial fear returned and her mind screamed warnings. What was he going to do now? Would it hurt? She shook her head slightly, unsure if she could allow it. Caleb noticed her hesitation. He set the bottle aside and motioned gently, using slow, careful gestures to show that he would not proceed without her permission. He even demonstrated on the bandage he had wrapped earlier, gently touching it as if to say, "This is safe and I will be careful." Ahioka watched intently, her heart pounding. She realized that he was not only skilled but patient, and that he truly wanted to help her. After a long pause, she took a deep breath and nodded slightly. Caleb's eyes softened, and he carefully applied the liquid to her wound. The sting was brief but sharp, and Ahioka gasped, pressing her hand to her side. Yet the pain quickly subsided, replaced by a soothing warmth. Her injury felt calmer, less threatening, and she realized that this simple act was saving her life. Caleb cleaned the surrounding area and adjusted the bandage once more. He then leaned back and gestured toward the fire, indicating that she could rest. Ahioka hesitated, unsure if she could fully relax, but the warmth of the flames and the gentle presence of Caleb encouraged her to lie down more comfortably. She curled up on the ground, still tense, but allowing herself a small measure of relief. As she rested, her mind wandered. She thought about her family and the village she had left behind. Would they be worried about her? Would they know she had been injured? The uncertainty made her stomach twist with anxiety, but seeing Caleb so calm and capable helped her feel a little less alone. She realized that while she could not control what had happened to her, she could control how she responded. Right now, that meant trusting the man who had saved her life. Caleb, sensing her thoughts, did not speak but instead simply offered a gentle nod and a small, reassuring smile. He was communicating without words, showing her through actions that he would stay by her side and that she could rely on him. Ahioka's heart warmed at this silent understanding. She had expected danger, distrust, and betrayal, yet here was someone offering her safety and care without asking for anything in return. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the tall grass and carrying the scent of distant wildflowers. Ahioka shivered, not just from the chill but from the overwhelming realization that she had survived so far. She felt the ache in her side, the fatigue in her legs, and the tension in her muscles, but she also felt a growing sense of determination. She would survive this night. She would survive this injury, and perhaps with Caleb's help she could find her way back to her people. Caleb worked quietly nearby, preparing a small drink from the herbs he had brought. He mixed the leaves with water, creating a bitter but healing liquid. He handed it to her, motioning for her to drink slowly. Ahioka hesitated at first, then took a careful sip. The warmth spread through her body, easing her pain and strengthening her resolve. She realized that this man's knowledge of plants and healing was extraordinary, and that she could learn from him if she allowed herself to trust him. For a while, they sat in quiet companionship. Neither spoke much, yet the silence was not uncomfortable. The fire's glow highlighted the contours of Caleb's face and the tired but alert expression in Ahioka's eyes. They shared this moment of peace, small but precious, in a world that was otherwise harsh and unforgiving. As the night deepened, Ahioka began to speak softly, sharing fragments of her story. She told him about her family, the village, and the skirmish that had left her injured. Caleb listened attentively, nodding and responding with gestures that conveyed understanding. Though their languages were different, they found ways to communicate, through hands, expressions, and shared understanding. The simple act of listening and being heard created a deeper connection between them. Ahioka realized that trust was not given lightly, but it could grow through small actions, shared experiences, and mutual respect. Caleb's patience, care, and calm presence were teaching her that not all strangers brought harm, and that some could become allies, even friends. Hours passed, and the first hints of dawn began to appear on the horizon. The sky shifted from deep blue to pale orange, signaling the start of a new day. Ahioka felt a renewed sense of hope. The night had been long and challenging, but she had survived, and she had done so with the help of someone who had shown her kindness and understanding. Caleb stood, stretching slightly, then looked down at her. He gestured toward the horizon, indicating that it was time to move, to leave the place where danger could still lurk. Ahioka nodded, feeling stronger and more capable than she had when they had first met. She realized that she could follow him, that she could trust him to guide her to safety. As they prepared to leave, Ahioka felt a deep sense of gratitude. This cowboy, a stranger just hours ago, had risked his own safety to help her. He had taught her patience, care, and the importance of trust. And though the journey ahead would still be dangerous, she felt ready to face it, knowing that she was not entirely alone. The plain stretched out before them, vast and challenging, yet filled with the possibility of survival and hope. Ahioka and Caleb moved carefully, side by side, navigating the uneven terrain. Each step was deliberate, each movement cautious, yet they were no longer just two strangers thrown together by chance. They were companions, allies in a world that demanded resilience and courage. And so, under the slowly brightening sky, the wounded Apache woman and the steadfast cowboy continued their journey. Together, they faced the uncertainty of the plains, strengthened by trust, patience, and the growing bond between them. The night had tested them both, but they had emerged stronger, more aware of each other, and more determined to survive whatever challenges lay ahead. The sun rose slowly over the plains, painting the horizon in warm shades of orange and gold. The chill of night had faded, replaced by the gentle warmth of morning. Ahioka stirred, feeling the stiffness in her muscles from the long night, but she also felt a renewed sense of strength. Her wound, though still tender, no longer throbbed with the same sharp pain. She glanced at Caleb, who was already tending to the fire and packing his few belongings. The calm confidence he carried made her heart settle in a way it hadn't in hours. Caleb noticed her waking and offered a small, reassuring smile. Without words, he gestured for her to eat a bit of the simple breakfast he had prepared, a few pieces of bread and some dried fruit. Ahioka accepted cautiously, grateful for the nourishment. She chewed slowly, savoring each bite, while Caleb kept an eye on the surrounding plains. Even in these quiet moments, the vast wilderness reminded them that danger could appear without warning. After eating, Caleb pointed toward the horizon, then to their current location. He was suggesting that they needed to move to find a safer place. Ahioka nodded. The thought of leaving the fire, the small comfort of warmth, and the safety of that moment made her hesitate, but she knew he was right. Staying in one place too long could attract unwanted attention. She adjusted the bandage on her side carefully, wincing slightly at the discomfort, but she knew she had to keep moving. As they began walking, Caleb maintained a steady pace, watching her carefully. He made sure she could keep up, occasionally slowing down or offering a hand to help her over uneven ground. Ahioka noticed these small acts and felt a growing sense of gratitude. She had expected strangers to be careless or rough, but Caleb was thoughtful and patient. Every step, every gesture seemed to speak volumes about his character. The plains stretched endlessly around them, golden and wild. Ahioka took in her surroundings, noticing the tall grass swaying in the breeze, the distant hills, and the occasional scatter of trees. Despite the beauty, she remained alert, knowing that danger could lurk anywhere. Caleb seemed to sense her thoughts, and he would occasionally glance around, scanning the horizon, his movements precise and deliberate. She realized that he was not only her companion but also her protector. As they walked, Ahioka began to speak softly, using her native language at first. Caleb did not understand the words, but he listened intently, nodding and observing her expressions. She told him fragments of her life, stories of her family, the village she had come from, and the lessons her grandmother had taught her. Caleb responded with gestures, simple words and soft tones, showing that he was listening and understanding in his own way. The exchange, though limited, strengthened the fragile trust between them. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, turning the plains warmer. Caleb spotted a small stream nearby and motioned for them to rest and drink. Ahioka bent carefully to the cool water, cupping it in her hands and bringing it to her lips. The refreshing liquid eased the dryness in her throat and revived her spirit. Caleb drank as well, his movements calm and methodical. She realized that despite their differences in language and culture, their shared needs, water, safety, and care, were uniting them in a small but meaningful way. After resting, they continued moving, taking care to avoid open areas where they could be easily spotted. Caleb pointed out safer paths, areas where the grass provided cover and where the terrain allowed for easier travel. Ahioka followed his lead, learning quickly from his guidance. Each step built her confidence, teaching her that she could navigate this harsh world with the help of someone she had begun to trust. As they walked, Ahioka noticed a faint trail of smoke rising in the distance. Her heart tightened with worry. Could it be danger, or could it be another person? She glanced at Caleb, who had already noticed it. He motioned for her to stay low, crouching slightly himself, and began moving cautiously toward the edge of the grass where they could see better. Ahioka followed, her body tense but ready. The smoke was from a small fire, likely from a distant traveler or a hunter. Caleb observed it carefully, considering the distance and wind direction. He whispered softly, not in words Ahioka could understand, but in gestures and expressions, that they should avoid it. Ahioka nodded, impressed by his ability to assess the situation quickly and calmly. Once again, she realized that his presence was not just helpful but essential for her survival. The day wore on, and the sun climbed higher, making the plains hot and tiring. Ahioka's wound throbbed slightly with each step, reminding her that she still needed care. Caleb noticed her discomfort and adjusted his pace, occasionally gesturing for her to rest briefly. During these moments, he would check the bandage, ensuring that it stayed secure and that the wound remained clean. Ahioka appreciated these acts of care. They were simple, yet they made her feel valued and safe. As they traveled, they began to share more through gestures and expressions. Caleb taught her small ways to find edible plants and water, while Ahioka shared knowledge about the land, identifying familiar herbs and landmarks. Their communication grew, relying not on words but on observation, understanding, and shared experiences. Each small lesson strengthened their bond and gave Ahioka hope that she could survive, even in unfamiliar territory. The afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the plains. They reached a small grove of trees, a rare spot of shade and shelter. Caleb gestured for them to stop, and Ahioka sank gratefully beneath the branches. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool shade ease the warmth of the day. Caleb did the same, setting down his few belongings and keeping watch. The moment was peaceful, yet both remained alert, aware that the plains could be unpredictable. While resting, Ahioka spoke softly again, sharing a story from her childhood about a time when her grandmother had taught her to track animals and find hidden water sources. Caleb listened attentively, nodding and occasionally using gestures to show he understood. Though their languages were different, their shared moments created a deeper connection. Ahioka began to realize that trust and friendship could exist even without perfect understanding. Sometimes actions, care, and patience spoke louder than words. Caleb, noticing the time, began preparing a small meal from the provisions he carried. He gestured for Ahioka to eat first, showing thoughtfulness and respect. She accepted gratefully, realizing that his actions reflected a genuine concern for her well-being. The meal was simple but nourishing, and it gave them both energy to continue the journey. After eating, Caleb checked the wound again, adjusting the bandage carefully. Ahioka flinched slightly at the touch, but she allowed him to continue, trusting his experience. She realized that the discomfort was minor compared to the relief she felt knowing that her injury was being properly cared for. Caleb's patience and steady hands reminded her once more that he was not just a stranger. He was a protector, a guide, and a friend in the making. As the sun began to set, casting warm golden light across the plains, Caleb pointed toward a distant ridge, suggesting that they could rest there for the night. Ahioka agreed, following his lead. The climb was slow and careful, her body still weak, but she felt stronger with Caleb by her side. He offered support when the terrain became tricky, helping her navigate uneven ground and rocky paths. Each small act of assistance reinforced the bond forming between them. Finally, they reached a sheltered area on the ridge, where the wind was lighter and the view offered some protection from the open plains. Caleb built a small fire, taking care to keep it controlled and safe. Ahioka watched him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The day had been long and challenging, but they had managed to navigate the dangers together. She realized that with patience, trust, and mutual care, they could overcome obstacles that might have seemed impossible alone. As night fell, the stars began to sparkle once again in the clear sky. Ahioka lay close to the fire, feeling safer and more at ease than she had in days. Caleb kept watch, his eyes scanning the horizon, ready to respond to any threat. In this quiet moment, they shared a silent understanding, a bond forged not just through survival, but through trust, patience, and the small acts of kindness that had carried them through the day. Ahioka realized that she was learning more than survival skills from Caleb. She was learning the value of trust, the power of patience, and the importance of compassion. The plains were vast and unforgiving, but she felt a small, growing confidence that she could face them, not alone, but with someone who had proven that he cared. And so, under the soft glow of the fire and the endless expanse of stars, the wounded Apache woman and the steadfast cowboy rested, preparing themselves for the journey ahead. Together they had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, and together they would continue, stronger, wiser, and bound by a trust that neither had expected but both now relied upon. The first light of dawn spilled over the horizon, painting the plains in soft pinks and golds. Ahioka stretched slowly, her muscles stiff but her body stronger than the day before. The wound on her side, though still tender, no longer burned with the same sharp pain. The long night of rest, careful tending, and gentle encouragement from Caleb had given her strength. She looked at him, kneeling by the small fire he had kept burning through the night, and realized just how much he had helped her, not only with her injury, but with her courage, her hope, and her sense of trust. Caleb stood as soon as the light grew brighter, packing his satchel and carefully tending to their few supplies. He gestured for Ahioka to rise, then pointed toward the distant hills, indicating that they should continue moving. Ahioka nodded, a sense of determination rising within her. Today, she would leave this ridge and continue toward safety, toward her people, with Caleb by her side. She felt ready, not just physically but emotionally, to face whatever challenges the plains might hold. As they began walking, the morning air was fresh and crisp. Birds sang faintly in the distance, their songs carrying across the open fields. Ahioka kept her eyes on the ground, watching for uneven terrain, while also noticing the beauty around her. The golden grass swayed gently in the breeze, and the hills in the distance promised shelter and perhaps even help. Caleb moved steadily, keeping an alert watch on their surroundings, but his pace was measured, ensuring that she could keep up. The journey was not easy. The plains were vast and exposed, and the sun climbed higher, making the day warmer and more challenging. Ahioka's body ached from the previous injury, but Caleb's steady presence gave her courage. He occasionally pointed out a safe path through the rough terrain, helped her navigate small streams, and offered support when the ground became uneven. Each small gesture reminded her that she was not alone. At one point, they came across a small ravine with rocks and shrubs scattered along its edge. Caleb carefully examined the area and motioned for Ahioka to follow him, using gestures to indicate where to step. She moved slowly, placing her feet carefully on stable ground, while he reached back to guide her over trickier spots. The simple act of holding her hand for support made her heart swell with gratitude and trust. She realized that even in this harsh, dangerous world, moments of kindness could carry immense strength. After navigating the ravine, they paused briefly near a stream. The cool water called to them, and Ahioka bent down to drink, letting the refreshing liquid revive her body. Caleb drank as well, careful not to drink too quickly, and then he cupped water in his hands, offering it to her again. The act, though small, felt like a shared ritual of survival and care. They were two travelers bound by circumstance, yet slowly becoming companions through the challenges they faced together. As they continued, the sun rose higher, and the heat began to weigh on them. Ahioka felt fatigue creeping into her legs, and the bandage on her side began to irritate her skin. Caleb noticed her discomfort immediately. Without words, he pointed toward a shaded area under a cluster of trees ahead, motioning that they could rest there briefly. Ahioka nodded, grateful for his attention and guidance. They moved carefully, finally settling under the trees where the shade offered a welcome respite from the sun's glare. While resting, Ahioka spoke softly, sharing more of her story. She told Caleb about her family, her village, and the lessons her grandmother had taught her. Caleb listened intently, nodding, gesturing, and using simple words she could understand. Though their languages were different, their communication relied on patience, observation, and empathy. Each story she shared, each gesture he responded with, strengthened the bond forming between them. Trust had grown into a fragile but powerful friendship. After a short rest, Caleb checked the wound again, adjusting the bandage and applying a small amount of the herbal mixture. Ahioka flinched slightly but allowed him to continue. She had come to rely on his steady hands and thoughtful care. His patience and attentiveness reassured her that she could survive the journey ahead, even with the pain she still carried. As they continued, the terrain became more challenging. They had to navigate rocky hills, cross shallow streams, and move carefully through patches of tall grass that could hide snakes or other wildlife. Caleb guided Ahioka with precise instructions, pointing out the safest path and offering a hand when needed. She followed, learning to trust not only his skill but also his judgment. She realized that survival required not just strength, but wisdom, caution, and reliance on others. During their journey, they encountered small signs of life, birds, rabbits, and distant shapes moving in the grass. Caleb would stop and gesture, teaching Ahioka how to observe these signs and understand the environment around them. She learned to notice subtle movements, changes in the wind, and the sounds of animals, all of which could indicate safety or danger. The lessons, though simple, gave her confidence and a growing sense of capability. As the day wore on, the sky began to change. Clouds gathered in the distance, hinting at the possibility of rain. Caleb adjusted their course slightly, guiding them toward a small grove of trees that could offer shelter if a storm arrived. Ahioka followed, trusting his instincts. She realized that their survival depended not only on their physical strength, but also on their ability to work together, to anticipate danger, and to support each other through uncertainty. Finally, as the sun dipped lower in the sky, they reached a sheltered area near a small hill. Caleb quickly set up a small fire, careful to control the flames, and motioned for Ahioka to rest nearby. She settled close to the fire, feeling warmth in her body and comfort in her heart. The day had been long and exhausting, but they had managed to navigate the challenges together. Each step, each act of care had brought them closer to safety and to understanding each other. As night fell, the plains quieted once more. The stars began to shine, scattered across the sky like tiny points of light guiding travelers through darkness. Ahioka looked at Caleb, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He had saved her life, cared for her injury, taught her how to navigate the land, and most importantly, shown her that trust and kindness could exist even in the harshest circumstances. Caleb kept watch, his eyes scanning the horizon while ensuring the fire remained safe. Ahioka rested, her body tired but her mind clear. She realized that their journey had taught her more than survival skills. It had taught her the importance of trust, patience, and empathy. The bond they had formed was not built in words alone, but in actions, care, and the shared experience of facing challenges together. As the night deepened, Ahioka spoke softly, sharing a final story from her childhood about how her grandmother had taught her to find strength in unexpected places. Caleb listened intently, nodding and responding with gestures of understanding. She realized that through this journey, she had not only survived physically, but had also grown emotionally, learning to trust and rely on another person in a world that often demanded self-reliance. The night passed quietly. Dawn approached once more, and with it came a renewed sense of hope. Ahioka and Caleb packed their belongings, ready to continue the journey toward true safety. The plains stretched out before them, vast and wild, but neither felt alone. They had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty together, and in doing so, they had forged a bond that would carry them through the remaining challenges ahead. As they moved together across the open land, Ahioka felt a profound sense of gratitude and determination. She had survived the injury, the wilderness, and the fear that had gripped her. But most importantly, she had discovered that trust, patience, and companionship could provide strength even in the harshest conditions. Caleb had become more than a protector. He had become a friend, a guide, and a source of hope in a world that could so easily be unforgiving. By midday, they began to see signs of human presence, distant smoke from a settlement, faint sounds of animals tending to their daily routines, and the subtle tracks of others moving through the land. Ahioka's heart leapt. Safety was close, and with Caleb's careful guidance, they approached the area cautiously, ensuring that they would not be surprised or endangered. Finally, they reached a small village at the edge of the plains. The people there were wary at first, but upon seeing Ahioka's condition and Caleb's care, they offered help. She was able to rest properly, receive further treatment, and share her story. Caleb, standing nearby, observed quietly, satisfied that she was safe. Ahioka realized that her journey through the plains had been transformative. She had faced fear, injury, and uncertainty, but with Caleb's guidance, patience, and unwavering care, she had survived and grown stronger. Trust had been tested and earned, and she now understood that even in a harsh world, kindness and understanding could prevail. The sun began to set once more over the plains, casting a warm glow over the village and the two travelers. Ahioka looked at Caleb and smiled, a smile of gratitude, relief, and newfound hope. He nodded in return, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they had formed through their shared journey. Together they had faced the wilderness, and together they had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future might hold. In that quiet moment, with the plains stretching endlessly beyond them, Ahioka understood something profound. Survival was not just about enduring pain or avoiding danger. It was about connection, trust, and the courage to let someone help you when you need it most. And in Caleb, she had found all of that. A companion who had saved her life, guided her through the challenges, and shown her that even in the harshest of worlds, hope could flourish.